So my co-host Rob did the one thing that I never expected would happen on this podcast. And that is that he recommended a good book. Hey everyone, welcome back to Reading Crossbow. My name is Lana and I'm here with my co-host Rob.
Hey, Lana, and hello to everyone else, and welcome to Reading Crossbow. We're here this week to review my choice this month, which is Bells Hells, What Doesn't Break by Cassandra Khaw. And I'm kind of excited to talk about this book. It is a very different pick for me, I think.
Yeah, very different. I was not expecting this book, Rob. And actually, I picked up and put down this book probably 6 or 7 times before finishing this book because the beginning was rough for someone like me. This is true to you. This is grimdark. This is horror. This is like guts and demons and undead things and gross. And I was just like, not today. I picked it up. Not today. And I kept doing this. Not today. And I don't know. Did you have that problem?
No, not at all.
I didn't think so.
So just to get started, this is a book based on the Critical Role show. Critical Role, if you're not aware, is a Dungeons and Dragons recorded show, mostly played by Hollywood voice actors. They've done several different campaigns, recorded them all, as well as it's inspired a show on Amazon Prime called The Legend of Vox Machina, which is actually a pretty amazing, fun animated show. You should definitely watch it. But this book, What Doesn't Break, is based on their third campaign, which was called Bells Hells. And this is interesting because it is actually a book novelizing the backstory for just one of the player characters, which I think is its biggest challenge because the campaign starts off and the character's only 3rd level and a very new character. So to have a whole novel talking about their backstory, I mean, this sounds like a Dungeons and Dragons DM nightmare when your player brings you a whole novel of their backstory. But obviously that wasn't the case here. This was written well after the fact. So just a basic idea is this character, Laudna, is an undead creature that during the Bells Hells campaign is one of the heroes of the party. So this book was really just built to explore her history. Where did she come from? Who is her patron? Her warlock patron specifically. Where did Pate come from, and how did she meet Imogen? Those kinds of questions. Now, I didn't actually watch the 3rd campaign of Critical Role, so I kind of went into this story cold, but I've later read a lot about the campaign. It actually sounds like a ton of fun. So, what about you, Lena? How did you feel going into this book?
So I was pretty surprised how easy it was to pick up because I don't have much experience at all with Dungeons and Dragons outside of the movie. Hate me all you want in the comments, those who love it. I am the casual, consumer of this type of content, and I know it's fine. But yeah, Dungeons and Dragons movie, picking up stuff here and there. I like some of the figurines. I think it's cool. Critical Role, I have watched a couple of the episodes. I actually started. I watched the first season 1, and someone told me, "Oh, don't start there. Don't start there. Start with season 3 or whatever they're called. They're called something else." And I watched, I think, 2 or 3 episodes. Interesting. I read this and never remembered any of it. Didn't connect the characters, so none of it stuck. But enjoyed my time.
Okay. Now, the reason why I picked this book is when I first was reading fantasy novels as a teenager, I read very heavily into Dungeons and Dragons novels, especially the Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms and Dark Sun. And that was all very much inspirational for my gaming. Now, this one's kind of the opposite. This was a game that became a novel. But I don't know. I was kind of excited to read this one. And it's a very different character. What do you think?
So I think the thing that I'm most impressed about is I was worried that I wouldn't have enough like back knowledge to understand this, or I'd be missing parts. And it's written in such a way that you actually feel like you're missing parts at times, but they do get answered. But I didn't need any previous knowledge at all, so no critical role. It didn't matter. This book is a great standalone book, so it was fine. Went into this, very well without having to feel like I had to adopt. So no previous game experience, no Dungeons and Dragons experience at all. Like this was easy to pick up and easy to begin.
And I always like to, I think every book should be that way, especially ones built into a bigger world or a bigger series or something like that, that every book should be able to be picked up and read cold. It should give you whatever information you need to understand the story. Now, if you have more information than that, then you'll get a deeper understanding or maybe get more from it. But we didn't quite have that same experience when we read The Lion, Son of the Forest.
Yeah, that one was rough, but that's okay. This one was easy. And I think what I really liked about this book, minus the fact that I put it down seriously 6 or 7 times, as I said, was that the characters in this book really came alive, and the author spent a ton of time doing that. And I don't know if it was a what cart before the horse, chicken, egg thing it is, because the show was out. The voice actors brought life to these characters already, so I don't know if that helped the author. But the more I've read about the author and looked into her, she is just actually really good at creating these characters on her own. So actually bringing these two together is, I think, what really shined here.
Yeah, I would agree. And just to kind of give you an idea of what the book is like, it is kind of a slice of life story almost, because as I mentioned, it has the difficult task of narrating the background story for a character who starts off the campaign at a rather low level. So it's not like she could have done a lot of world-changing things. There's just not enough room for history there, for a lot of history at least. So this story starts off as after, within the first couple chapters, and Laudna's coming into her new life as a living dead girl. And what does that mean? Does she, how does she interact with this world that instantly is going to be afraid of her?
Rob Zombie knows what that means.
I'm sure he does.
So this book starts out, we should say for our viewers, like I said, kind of rough. So, I mean, when we're talking about the grimdark world, we're really hit with that, right up front. So in the first, few pages, I actually should say, this book's in 4 different parts. And each part starts off with a bit of a fairy tale that I personally, as a reader, didn't relate well to each chapter, although I know that they were written to sort of preface the chapters, but not necessarily be part of them. But the fairy tales were interesting. So you go from the fairy tale, which is a different character, to the main character. And that main character gets a rough start at life. And we're talking like total family decimation. Like she seriously shows up to a dinner party just to, well, we can say this, basically become the dinner. We don't exactly know what happens. This is all a faded part of her memory. But we get pieces of this as the book goes on. Laudna's basically trying to put herself together. But as you mentioned, something very gruesome happens to her, told in gory detail, full gory detail, and she wakes up with no memory of it and has to put her life together. She basically wakes up swinging from a tree. And this all happens within the first few, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 pages.
Yeah, it's pretty early on. And if you're actually a fan of the show Legend of Vox Machina, this is somewhat portrayed during the show, her origin story, although it's not highlighted at all during the show. And I'm sure even during the original campaign, this character hadn't been invented yet. So, but yeah, it's a pretty dark scene. And a good chunk of the early part of this book is kind of body horror, as Laudna's coming into existence and she's dead, but walking around, and she has this voice in her head that wants to talk.
She does. I think I should also say that if you're if you didn't expect this fantasy world, the author, in terms of the setting, doesn't necessarily set you up for that. So if you didn't know this was the type of world that has all sorts of crazy different characters in it, like orcs and paladins and undead and sprites and all dryads, like this is a bit surprising because as you're getting introduced to characters, you don't exactly know what they are if you've never read that before. And even knowing it and kind of expecting it, it took me a moment to kind of realize what was going on and like what type of character she was talking to. So this book takes a minute to get going to introduce you to the world, but it does it. It would just happen to readers quicker. You would get immersed faster if you were used to this type of fantasy level.
Now, the actual narrative style, this is told basically exclusively from Laudna's point of view. And so you only understand what she understands. So there's like chunks of this story where her memory is very wonky and she doesn't want to, or she subconsciously doesn't want to remember certain things, and other things she doesn't care about. So she, like, it explicitly says she doesn't care about what's happening here. She's focusing on something else, while her patron is like directing her to do things. And she's doing what her warlock patron is asking, but she doesn't actually talk about it too much in the book. It's left mysterious because she doesn't care. She's just doing what the patron wants, and while she's focusing on these other ideas. And I found that the mystery of that both exciting and a bit frustrating, as some of those things don't actually get answered within the book. But maybe they get answered during the campaign, and I need to go back and watch that.
True. And this part that you're talking about was actually one of the most fascinating parts of the story once I realized what was going on. And that was part of what I was trying to say about being in this world that's new and different if you're not used to this type of book, because she starts out human, she basically becomes undead, and in these parts where she's really trying to get attuned with her body, which is different, the first few pages when she's human and hasn't gone through this horrific event, it's written like a young girl, and she's excited about the dinner party and having her hair done and getting to meet, the mistress of the home. And then we go to like a weird wobbly girl in a body she doesn't quite understand, and she's trying to walk and run and learn, and because it's all new to her. And it actually took me a bit of time to figure out what was going on and realize, wait, is this undead? Wait, this is undead. Okay, I've read undead before, I know, but if you hadn't, that might be odd. Which might be a good time to talk about the writing style, actually.
Okay.
Because this author is, the best way I could put it is a word wielder. This author is a full-on thesaurus. I actually felt incredibly stupid for the first several pages, because I'm like, oh no, I don't want to go grab a thesaurus. I don't want to look this word up. If I keep reading contextually, am I going to understand what's going on? Because that's work. This is a 250-page book. Rob recommended. Am I going to do extra work? No, I don't want to do extra work. I was mad. And yes, contextually, she does eventually get to the point where you understand. You don't need to actually understand those words. She's just showing off. But I will say, she's very good at it. And yeah, I actually grew to love her showing off. Frustrating in the beginning, but incredible writer.
I also enjoyed just the way the story was told, especially at the parts where the unhinged nature of Laudna's psyche really was showing itself. I found just the way it was written, it conveyed how disjointed her memory and the way it works. And I love those bits, even though mechanically they were a bit confusing, but it's written in a way to make you kind of feel like you're seeing the world from her point of view. And I think it's very well done for its purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. That journey, how you described it, is exactly how I felt. While she's going through that transition of acceptance, we'll get into more like the humanity here in a bit. But you, I think the awkward was intentional because by the end of the story, we have a full transition, a lot of growth in a character, and that actually changes in the writing style a bit too. The pace gets a bit quicker. Her the way she speaks is definitely concise and well put together. We almost go through, well, we do go through this rebirth even though she's undead. So it's she kind of learns to talk in the beginning too. So this frustration as you're reading it, I'm sure, is the frustration of Laudna as she's trying to speak it and get it out. And I could almost sense what it might be like to be a toddler and say what you want to say, but you just can't. And then she even like makes herself little toy things to entertain herself. And, this is, I mean, really great character development. And by the end of it, she's almost, matronly in her terms and soft spoken towards another character in the book.
Yeah, I found it to just be kind of just a very almost beautiful story. Like, even though this doesn't follow the traditional epic story fantasy storytelling, it's not that at all. This is a very, this is, like I said slice of life, but it's basically just kind of understanding this person's world.
And if you like fairy tales and if you like scary movies, this is such a fast read. It's 250 pages. So really, it's like, it's a bit of a bump in the dark, so to speak, because we start out kind of rough and grim, a little spooky. And actually, the word spooky is used quite a bit in this book in a fond way. It's fun. And then we get into more fairy tale aspect of it, which is great. But let's actually talk about that because I was put off, as I mentioned, by the horror of the book. There's so much and the stumbly, rough, bumbly start until I figured out it's an undead trying to figure out how to operate their body. But I think outside of the horror and things like peeled off faces and decomposing bodies and like maggots and grubs coming out of something's mouth, which does happen, we get into what's probably one of the most well written examples of humanity that I've actually read in a long time. And I'm actually struggling to figure out like a book that I've read that compares to how well Cassandra writes about humanity. It's actually very beautiful. I'm just shocked, Rob. Like, I just can't believe you recommended a book that I think is like sweet. And
It,
there's dead things, but it's so sweet.
and it really is. And she has to contend with a lot of, essentially, there is a quite a bit of mechanical racism because most of the world is reasonably terrified of essentially what they would see as being an undead or a zombie approaching them, even if it's, and especially because she doesn't speak well for good chunk of the book. She thinks fine, but like she has a hard time pronunciating, and so when she tries to talk to people, it's really gravelly, and she struggles to get out the words sometimes, and people are just scared of her because everything they know about undead is they're coming to kill you and eat you, and she can't communicate that very well. And even when she can, the people are like, yeah, I get you might not be a bad one, but go away or we're going to have to just kill you anyway. And it's heartbreaking.
It is, and she tries so hard. And I think, without giving too much, it's only 250 pages. It's hard to not give too much away. And a lot of people who are watching this are going to click on this thumbnail because we're going to, promote Critical Role. But so that you're familiar with these characters. But like in her struggle to prove to people that, she's nice, accept me, love me, she's like repairing things around villages very shoddily, and she's trying to like sew things and just do dishes for people. And they just hate her. And it's rough to even read it of like, can you just like her? I know she's ugly, I know she smells, but come on, she's the smelly kid in class and you just want her to be loved. But I was wondering if you mind if we talk about a couple other characters because
Sure.
people who love Critical Role are going to will recognize Laudna and they'll recognize another character, which is Imogen.
Mm-hmm.
So those two are in the story. Laudna, this is about her story, so we don't get Imogen much. So I'll leave that part, to the reader. But we also get two characters that I can't ignore. We talk about characters that, you keep thinking about. And one of them is this character that plays actually a decent part in the book, even though she's not a main character. And that's Bella.
Mm-hmm.
And Bella is a little girl. And so by the time Laudna meets Bella, she's basically that age in terms of her mind's growth. She's taken a lot of growth at this point. And so even though I think she'd probably be more like 20 something at the time she meets her, my guess ish, she's actually more like 10 herself. And they become best buddies. And she hangs out with this little girl. But Bella is a Spitfire. Bella is bigger than her age in years. She is like, she just won't take no for an answer. She's like, you undead stinky girl, you are going to be my best friend. And I love it. Bella's fantastic. I'll probably think about Bella for a long time. Bella is so dynamic that she even has like 3 versions of herself. So there's different moments in the story where she meets another character, or they, try to go to tell her to go to bed or whatever it is. They're treating her like a child. And she's like, they say, she's like, oh no, I'm Bella, but it's short for Belladonna. It means poison. Or another one was like Isabella from her mother, but she basically has like 3 different backstories to her own name. She's super interesting.
Yeah, she's a great character. There's, I think they call them exarchs, but I think mechanically in D&D, the character's probably either a paladin or a cleric, but basically she runs into basically a religious warrior. And even those characters are very interesting in the way they interact with Laudna. So I think all the characters that you encounter, even the ones who don't respond well to Laudna, it makes sense. They're written well. And yeah, this is it's hard to say too much, as you noted, because it is a short book. But it's a great story.
There's one character that never got any follow-up, and I'm pissed about, and I can talk about it without like ruining the story. So I'm going to bring this up. It is the baker's assistant. And I'm quite angry because like I read all these romanticises and I was not expecting any of that. Keep in mind, but my brain can't help it, Rob. And I swore we might get like a little bit of romantasy in here because there's this baker's assistant and he takes pity on her and she's thin and he wants to feed her. And he basically like leaves like bread for her, like old bakery items. And it's PETA from the Hunger Games. And I just he had like a good solid chapter or 2 in appearances. And I'm just like waiting for this little baker boy and this little undead girl. And I shipped this.
Yeah. You're shipping.
And then nothing.
You're shipping with the wrong character.
Yeah, I know now. But like at the time, I didn't know, right? Because I don't know any backstory to these characters. People watching this who were fans of Critical Role would have been like, you should have known. But you know what? That is also like just truth to how well the author did such a great job on this, because I'm even thinking of the little baker boy like all this time later. But you know what? This leads us to talking about where should you Critical Role? Where should you Dungeons and Dragons? Because you have your casuals like me. Someone's probably going to pick up this book because we both think it's pretty darn great. And they're going to say, okay, well, now this is my intro. This is my, gateway drug, so to speak, into Critical Role. What comes next? Where do we go, Rob? What do we do?
I think if if it was all brand new to them, I'd probably direct them to the Prime TV show Legend of Vox Machina. It's an easy consumable thing. It goes through the first campaign, or at least it hasn't finished it. I think there's still another season to go, but it's a great introduction to the show, and you actually get to see Laudna's origin story essentially played out in, I think, season 1. Yeah, season 1. I think the whole thing's really well done. What I think I liked most about this myself was Laudna's actually a character I would see myself playing the unhinged, useful, but, well-meaning crazy person in the party. I think that could be described many of my player characters. So yeah, I think that's what I actually most enjoyed about this was I couldn't imagine myself playing this character in my own games. And it's just a great story. I mean, I can't recommend this book enough for even casual fans of fantasy stories, and especially if you're a fan of Critical Role and Dungeons and Dragons. This is a great story because it's a very unique character, and you kind of get to see the world from a point of view you really don't get in other books.
So we should rate it then. Yeah? Who goes first? It's scary. I'm nervous to rate one of your books that I've talked well about.
So I guess we can maybe bury the lead there. I guess for me, I think this is better than good. I really just enjoyed this story. So I'm trying to think how do I review this? And I mean, at the end of the day, I really just enjoyed this. This is a real pleasure to read. Everything about this was fun. You know, even the parts that were kind of confusing, especially near the beginning. I feel like all of that was very deliberate and intentional to kind of make you feel like you understand this character's point of view. And that's incredibly well done. And so I'm going to have to go with a 4 here. I think this is a solid book, and I couldn't recommend this enough. What about you?
So, yeah, despite being the person that put it down so many times, once I got past, I think it was page 40, maybe somewhere in there, I was able to just zoom. I read this all super, super fast. It was great. My only complaints would be that I'm a little annoyed that the author made me feel dumb in the beginning, because I'm like, oh my gosh, what are these words? They were tough. But I began to appreciate it. I think it's amazing that the author wrote so much with so little words. And some of the authors that we've read could take a few pointers from her, especially Miss Sarah J. Maas from the last book that we read, where there was so much exposition. And I'm like, have you, Sarah, have you picked up this book? Have you read this author? Because this is how you do it. But also a little much. So, I mean, that was something that bothered me a little bit. And the audacity to not finish up anything with the Baker boy. She just like left him hanging. But I also think that's part.
Yeah, and that's so well done, because that's essentially how Laudna she just like moved on, and you know, she like, in the way her mind works, just faded out.
Yeah, and I also think that's a bit Dungeons and Dragons too. Like, you start off in a tavern, and where do you go from there? And then you just kind of leave those characters behind. So, like, in terms of like Dungeons and Dragons, this is fine. They were just like little side quests that led you somewhere else, whatever. So, outside of like those little things, once I got going, I just a little piece of my heart is with this character, and I think that that's such a beautiful thing. I didn't cry, I didn't get like, you know, anything like that, but like, when you are attached to a character, you do care that they do well. You do want her to have somewhat of a happy ending, even though you know she's always going to have a broken life. And that's just so freaking beautiful. I don't know how to say it, Rob. You did it. But yeah, it's a 4. It's a 4 for me. I want it to be a 5, but I think it can't. For the it can't go any further, and maybe that's just because it can with Critical Role, but like this story did end. You could picture it going further than that, but it is what it is, and that was enough for me. Solid 4.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's a prequel to a D&D campaign. There were hard limits to it, and I think within those limitations, it excelled, and I can't recommend this enough. Now, I guess for next month, I think I'm going to go something a little bit bigger, a wee bit bigger, and I'm going to recommend we read Red Rising by Pierce Brown.
I'm so excited.
This is a book that I have previously read. In a way, I started thinking about recommending this book when we read Mistborn, because I was trying to think of a single book that I could recommend that would really convey some of my thoughts and to Lana here. And I think this is a good choice. It's actually my favorite book in this series, the first book. And so I'm excited to read this one again and read it with you and talk about it.
Yeah, me too. Looking very much forward to that. And I picked a book called The Atlas Six, so we're both chomping off some pretty big books, some pretty big meanings, and these books mean a lot to a lot of people. And I don't know what the controversy is behind Atlas Six. The minute I read something about controversy around it, I actually stopped reading because I'm like, that sounds perfect. Something that people can argue with us in the comments, maybe, and maybe there is no controversy, and I just picked up on something that isn't there. But I'm super excited to get some conversation going. So happy about that. So Atlas Six and Red Rising, next month's choices. But you're also going to get some solo episodes from us. We're only doing 2 books a month now, so look for a solo episode from Rob and myself coming up soon. And that'll be it for the show. So make sure you like and subscribe, you all, if you are Critical Role fans or Dungeons and Dragons fans that clicked on this thumbnail and came to our video. Make sure to check out our other content and join our Discord.
Yep. Feel free to jump on the Discord, and I'm happy to discuss Dungeons and Dragons with anyone on our Discord.
Thanks all, and see you next time.
Thank you very much.